During a meeting with the most powerful investment firm, the founder was playing a video game. The investors gave him $2 billion. He didn't wear a suit. He barely made eye contact. The more unserious he looked, the more money they gave him. By the end of that year, he was running one of the most valuable financial companies in the world. Celebrities were putting their names on it. Senators were taking his meetings. Financial regulators were listening to him explain how they should do their jobs. And none of them, not one, noticed that the man sitting across from them was running the largest financial fraud in a generation out of an apartment he shared with 9 other people.
Guilty verdict of former cryptocurrency billionaire.
Those include defrauding investors in his failed crypto exchange empire. He was arrested in the Bahamas last night.
Very well could spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Let me tell you about the meeting. It took place over video call in the summer of 2021. On one side of the call, partners from Sequoia Capital, one of the most respected venture firms in the world, the firm that funded Apple, Google, Airbnb, Stripe. On the other side, him, a 29-year-old in a t-shirt, leaning back in a chair, in a room the partners couldn't quite make out. He started the pitch. About halfway through, one of the partners noticed something on his screen. He wasn't just distracted, he was playing a video game. In the middle of asking these men for hundreds of millions of dollars, he was running a character through a match of League of Legends. And the Sequoia partners, seasoned investors, men who had vetted 1,000 founders, didn't walk away. They leaned in. One of them, after the call, wrote a note that was later published. It became famous. It said, "I love this founder." That's the line. That's where the story begins. Because here is what those men believed they were seeing. They were seeing a genius. Somebody so brilliant, so absorbed in his own mind, that the normal rules of how to behave in a pitch meeting didn't apply to him. A founder so valuable that the game was a signal that he was operating on a plane the rest of them couldn't access. And if that was the signal they were reading, then the t-shirt was a signal. The hair was a signal. The Bahamas apartment was a signal. The polyamorous inner circle was a signal. The vegan diet, the index fund lecture circuit talking points, the mumbled answers to regulatory questions, all of it, signals of a mind too large for the costume. And here's what the script this entire industry had been running for a decade told them. The weirder a founder looks, the bigger the company becomes. Jobs had the turtleneck. Zuckerberg had the hoodie. Musk slept on the factory floor. The pattern was already written. The lesson venture capital had trained itself to believe was that genius always looks strange. And if you're not willing to fund the strangeness, you'll miss the next trillion-dollar company. So when this one looked strangest of all, they gave him the money. His name was Sam Bankman-Fried. And over the next 18 months, he would become the most trusted man in finance.
Hi, my name is Sam, and this is my story. I wanted to get rich not because I like money, but because I wanted to give that money to charity.
The appearance was only half the pitch, because under the t-shirt, under the mumbling, under the video game, was a story. He said he wasn't in this for the money. He said he was going to earn billions of dollars, and then he was going to give it all away. He called it Effective Altruism. It was a real philosophical movement based in Oxford. The premise was simple. The highest moral act is to earn as much money as possible in the most effective way, and then redirect it toward causes that save the greatest number of lives. He said this was why he was working. He said this was why he lived modestly. The t-shirt, the shared apartment, the old Corolla he drove. He was a steward of the money, not an owner of it. He said he intended to donate 99% of his eventual wealth. And this is the part of the story nobody talks about enough. Because it wasn't the business model that made him untouchable. It wasn't the trading strategy. It wasn't the platform. It was the morality. If you questioned him, you weren't challenging a CEO. You were challenging a man who was trying to save the world. And the people who questioned him, the short sellers who flagged the token math, the crypto reporters who couldn't reconcile the balance sheet, the handful of finance Twitter accounts who kept asking the same unanswered questions. They weren't treated as vigilant. They were treated as petty. Other journalists wrote them off as cranks. Other investors stopped returning their calls. The mainstream finance press, which was busy putting him on magazine covers, treated their questions as noise, the kind of contrarian static that always shows up around a successful founder, never worth taking seriously enough to verify. Why would you attack the guy giving his money to malaria nets? Why would you be cynical about the one founder who was doing all of this for others? He had built a firewall around himself, made not of lawyers or PR teams, but of virtue. And virtue, as it turns out, is the most effective camouflage there is. Because lawyers can be out-lawyered, PR teams can be caught lying. But a man who claims to be good can only be exposed by the kind of evidence that overwhelms the story. And by the time the evidence arrives, billions of dollars have already moved on the strength of the story alone. Before we get into what was actually running behind that story, the collapse playbook and the full Theranos case file are both linked in the description. Free. Join to get weekly case files. Now back to FTX. So let's talk about the company. On the surface, it was simple. It was a cryptocurrency exchange. You opened an account, you deposited money, the platform held it. You could trade, withdraw, and move your funds whenever you wanted. Your money stayed yours. That was the promise. That was, legally, the entire business. There was just one thing the customers didn't know. The man running the exchange also owned a second company, a trading firm. And the trading firm was located in the same office, staffed by the same inner circle, operating under his direction. The exchange held customer money. The trading firm made risky bets. These were supposed to be two completely separate entities. They weren't. Customer deposits, money people had placed on the exchange believing it would sit there, untouched, until they chose to withdraw it, were being moved. Not to investments, not anywhere they had agreed to the trading firm, which used the money to take positions in the market, leveraged bets, speculative plays, the kind of trades a professional firm makes with its own capital, not with money that belonged to people who had never agreed to put it at risk. Inside the company, they did not call this fraud. They called it strategy. And here's the mechanism that kept it invisible. As long as new deposits were coming in faster than withdrawals were going out, the gap didn't show. More users, more capital, more money flowing in, covering what had already been spent. The platform looked healthy. The numbers looked real. And the longer it worked, the more normal it felt. People inside the company stopped asking where the money was. People outside the company stopped imagining there was anywhere else it could be. The entire system rested on a single assumption: that nobody would ever ask for their money back all at once. And then somebody did. Everything I've told you so far, the genius myth, the moral story, the missing billions, it all came undone because of one document. A document that was never supposed to exist. On November 2nd, 2022, a small crypto publication called CoinDesk published an article. It wasn't long. It wasn't sensational. It was a leaked balance sheet from the trading firm, not the exchange. A document that was never supposed to be public. Most people who read it didn't understand what they were looking at. But a few people did, because buried inside the document was something that didn't make sense. The trading firm's assets, the things it owned that gave it value, weren't dollars. They weren't blue-chip investments. They weren't even a basket of normal cryptocurrencies. The majority of its assets were a single token, a token issued by the exchange itself, a token the trading firm owned, a token whose value was propped up by, and only by, the exchange's continued existence. In other words, the company was using its own invented currency as collateral to borrow real money, which it then used to gamble. If the token ever lost value, the collateral evaporated. If the collateral evaporated, the loans were exposed. If the loans were exposed, the exchange was insolvent. The entire empire was a house of cards holding itself up. And now, there was a document proving it. 4 days later, the CEO of the exchange's biggest competitor, a man named Changpeng Zhao, who ran Binance, posted a tweet. He said his firm was selling its entire holding of the suspicious token, not quietly, publicly. That tweet was the trigger, because markets don't run on documents. They run on belief. And the moment the second most powerful man in the industry said, in effect, "I don't trust this," every other holder of that token had to ask themselves the same question. The answer arrived in minutes. At first, it didn't look like a collapse. It looked like a reaction. Large institutional accounts, the accounts that move first in every financial crisis, started withdrawing. Not because they knew the full picture, because they knew enough to not want to wait and find out. In the first 24 hours, users requested more than $5 billion in withdrawals. But the money they were asking for wasn't there. It had been used for trades, for losses, for political donations, celebrity endorsements, Super Bowl ads, real estate in the Bahamas. So the exchange did what it was never supposed to need to do. It started pulling from whatever cash was still liquid. And when that ran out, it started slowing withdrawals. And when slowing didn't work, it started stopping them. Users watched their balances. They hit the withdraw button. Nothing happened. They waited, refreshed, waited again. Hours passed. Then a message appeared on the screen. Withdrawals paused. No timeline, no explanation, no path forward. And at that moment, millions of people across the world realized the same thing at the same time. Their money wasn't delayed. It wasn't processing. It was gone. Some of them had their life savings on the platform. Some of them had their retirement. Some of them had their children's college funds. All of them had believed, because everyone around them had believed, that it was safe. Behind the scenes, executives were scrambling. He was on the phone to every major investor and financial institution in the world, trying to raise billions of dollars in emergency capital. Not to grow, not to expand, to survive the weekend. The money didn't come. On November 11th, 2022, 9 days after the CoinDesk article, the company filed for bankruptcy.
This hearing is entitled Investigating the Collapse of FTX, Part 1.
When a company of this size collapses, the court appoints a restructuring expert. The man they appointed had a long career. He had overseen the aftermaths of some of the largest corporate collapses in American history. His name was John J. Ray III. Decades earlier, he had been the man brought in to clean up Enron. 2 weeks after he took over, he he filed a statement with the bankruptcy court. He had seen every type of corporate disaster. He had cleaned up the largest accounting frauds of the modern era. He wrote, and this is a direct characterization of his filing, that in 40 years of corporate restructuring work, he had never seen a failure of controls of this magnitude. There were no reliable financial statements. There was no centralized record of who owned what. Company funds had been used like personal funds. Personal funds had been used like company funds. Corporate expenses had been approved through emoji reactions and group chats. Major financial decisions had been made on encrypted apps that deleted messages automatically. The inner circle had been living in a penthouse in the Bahamas, the 9 roommates from the hook. The penthouse had been purchased with money traced to customer deposits. So had the private jets. So had the political donations. So had the Super Bowl ads. When investigators started looking for the billions of dollars that had vanished, they discovered that in many cases, there was no record the money had ever existed at all. But there was one more thing: a hacker. On the night the company filed for bankruptcy, while lawyers were taking control of the servers, while the restructuring team was walking into the building for the first time, someone was already inside the system. Over the course of a few hours, $477 million drained out of FTX wallets. Not to customers, not to creditors, not to any account anyone could identify. To addresses nobody has ever been able to trace back to a real person. Ray's team believed from the beginning that it was someone inside the company, someone with credentials, someone who knew exactly which wallets held what, and exactly when the window would open. 14 months later, the Department of Justice arrested 3 people, a SIM-swapping crew. They had walked into a cell phone store with a fake ID and stolen an employee's phone number, intercepted the security codes, drained the wallets. They were charged. The government had the low-level operators, but investigators believed they were working for someone else. The sophistication of the laundering, the timing, the routes the money took through decentralized exchanges and cross-chain bridges, the way portions of it later moved in coordination with funds traced to Russian criminal networks, suggested the 3 arrested weren't the architects. They were the crew. The Department of Justice has stayed quiet about the case. No press conference, no announcement. The charges were buried deep in a sealed indictment, discovered weeks later by security researchers. That silence suggests they're building towards someone larger. But as of now, no one has been charged with orchestrating the theft. The money has never been recovered. On the night the largest financial fraud in a generation collapsed, somebody walked out with $500 million. The government knows how. They don't know who gave the order. And they don't know where the money went. And the man at the center of it was still publicly claiming he had done nothing wrong.
I didn't ever try to commit fraud on anyone. I saw it as a thriving, growing business. I was shocked by what happened this month.
Inside the inner circle, the small group of people who lived together, worked together, made the decisions together, there was one person the investigators wanted most. Her name was Caroline Ellison. She had run the trading firm. She had, for a period, been in a relationship with the founder. She knew, more than almost anyone alive, what had actually happened, because she had helped do it. In December of 2022, the Department of Justice charged her with 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Facing decades in federal prison, she pleaded guilty to all of them. And then she made a choice. She agreed to cooperate. Not in a deposition, not in a settlement, in open court, under oath, on the record, in front of a jury that would decide what happened to the man she had spent the last several years of her life with. In October of 2023, she took the stand. She wore a plain cardigan. She kept her hands folded. She spoke quietly and slowly and without performance. In over 3 days of testimony, she described, in detail that no investigator could have reconstructed from the outside, exactly how the fraud had worked. She said the leadership knew customer funds were being used for the trading firm's bets. She said they had known for years. She said she had personally moved billions of dollars between the two companies on his direct instructions, while telling the public that the two companies were separate. The man across the courtroom, the man she had once shared a bed with, a business with, a life with, sat at the defense table, 10 feet away. She did not look at him, and he did not look at her. The trial lasted a month. Witnesses described the apartment, the messages, the transactions, the missing billions. Former employees described the culture. Customers described what they had lost. He took the stand in his own defense. It did not go well. Court transcripts show he answered, "I don't recall," over 100 times. When he said he didn't remember seeing a key document, the prosecution showed the jury his own digital fingerprints on the file. When he said he hadn't made a public claim, they showed the jury his tweet making it. When he said he hadn't said something, they showed the jury his email saying it. The judge had to direct him to answer the question repeatedly. Months later, at sentencing, that same judge would describe what he had seen. He said that when the defendant wasn't outright lying, he was evasive, hair-splitting, and dodging questions. And then he said this, quote, "In 30 years on the federal bench, I have never seen a performance quite like this," end quote. On November 2nd, 2023, exactly 1 year to the day from the CoinDesk article that started the collapse, the jury returned. Guilty on all 7 counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the United States. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He is currently incarcerated at a medium security facility in California. The company that had been worth $32 billion is gone. The customers who lost their savings are creditors in bankruptcy court, fighting to recover fractions of what was taken. The celebrities who endorsed the platform have paid settlements. The politicians who accepted his donations have mostly kept the money. He is 32 years old. He is scheduled for release in 2044. He will be 50 by the time he walks out. FTX didn't succeed because the business worked. It succeeded because no one wanted to be the one who said it didn't. Investors deferred to the myth of genius. Celebrities deferred to the story. Politicians deferred to the money. And everyone in every one of those rooms assumed someone else had checked. No one had. Because the story was too good. A genius, a future, a system too big to question. And every institution that should have stopped it had a reason not to. Because stopping it meant admitting they had missed it. So nobody stopped him. The math did. And before you decide this is a story about other people, the investors, the celebrities, the senators, ask yourself which cause you've stopped questioning. Because the person behind it seems good. That is the mechanism that built him. It is not rare. It is the default setting of how belief works. He was caught because the math ran out. Most of them never do. Power isn't built on genius. It's built on belief. And ruin begins the moment someone stops believing. Power and ruin covers the companies, empires, and movements that reshaped the world, and the belief systems that made their collapse inevitable. If that's a story worth telling, subscribe. We're just getting started.